Everybody for coming in today. Senator, thank you. I know you guys, are you guys still currently on the floor?
No, we're done. We are done. We do have another conference committee at 4, so we'll
Okay.
see where we get in the next hour.
Okay.
With this.
Yeah, and I think what we agreed to earlier is kind of just go over our what the bill does, our differences in the bill, and allow us to ask some questions, especially of the amendment that got attached in the Senate. So if we could have a revisor kind of go over 291 and the differences between that and 2436, and namely the amendment that was attached in the Senate.
Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill 291 is largely the same as House Bill 2436 outside of the floor amendment regarding foreign adversary owned or controlled securities that was added on the Senate floor. And with respect to that floor amendment, you'll note on page 3 of Senate Bill 291, there's a definition of foreign adversary, which is any government or non-government person determined to be a foreign adversary pursuant to 15 CFR section 7.4 in effect on July 1st of 2023. That's a federal regulation listing out foreign adversaries. And then on page 4, further defines person owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a foreign adversary. And so you see the persons and corporations, partnerships, associations, or other organizations that are listed within that definition. Next, I will direct your attention to sections 4 and 5 and 6 of the bill on pages 6 and 7. These are the provisions that require the Capers Board to sell, redeem, divest, or withdraw all publicly traded securities of any foreign adversary or person owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a foreign adversary. It specifies dates for that divestiture of at least 50% of such assets by 1 year after the effective date of this act, or 100% of such assets within 18 months of the effective date of this act. Section 5 requires the board to divest any indirect holdings in actively or passively managed investment funds or private equity funds that contain such publicly traded securities. And Section 6 requires that on the first day of regular session, the board is to file a report with the treasurer and the president and speaker of the legislature and the attorney general identifying such securities that have been divested and identifies all prohibited investments under Section 4 and summarizes any changes made in those managed funds under Section 5 if they have been moved and managed a different way.
Thank you for that, Jason. I do have one quick question. On 2436, Section 2, we have the word solely in line 28 and line 34. We do not have that in the Senate version, correct?
I believe you are correct, yes.
Okay, okay.
What page is that? What page is that?
2436, that's going to be page 3.
Oh, 3, okay.
Yes, sir. That's going to be lines 28 and 34 in Section 2.
I see it.
Yes,
I
sir.
see it. Okay.
Representative Shu.
Jason, the combination of the definition of person owned by, controlled by, et cetera, in addition to what the board must do, is it correct that not only does the board have to divest from any company that is located in one of these countries, but also has to divest from American companies that are founded by a non-naturalized citizen of one of these countries?
Not necessarily. There is a caveat that if the person is a dual citizen of the United States and the foreign adversary, then they are accepted out of that definition on page 4 and line 11.
Sure, but this would have to cause Capers, unless they're a dual citizen, that Capers would have to divest, even if it's an American company that was founded by, say, a Chinese immigrant who is not quite naturalized yet. Because China does not do dual citizenship, by the way.
It would have to be owned or controlled by a foreign adversary or organized under the laws of a nation state controlled by a foreign adversary. I'm not sure if those two conditions would apply to any American organized company.
So my reading of in subsection A of section 4, they have to divest by, from any public traded securities of any foreign adversary or person owned by, right? That part. And then on page 4, person owned by, included in that definition in subsection B, is any person wherever located who is a citizen or resident of a nation state control. So citizen. So if a Chinese citizen or refugee immigrates to the United States, they're still a Chinese citizen, but they can found a company and it become publicly traded, and then Capers would have to divest from that because they are still Chinese citizens.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to review the question and the language because I'm not clear, because we do define person both as an individual and entity, but we do also have specific provisions regarding companies as opposed to individuals. And so are you talking about an individual who organizes a company in the United States under United States law? Or are you talking about an individual who is a sole proprietor? I'm not sure exactly which or business organizational scenario you're proposing.
I'm just trying to comprehend the Senate amendment. So again, on page 6, the board shall divest all publicly traded securities of any foreign adversary or of a person owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign adversary.
So yes, if the person owns the majority share, it's a privately held company, and the person is not a U.S. citizen, but is a citizen or resident of a foreign adversary, then yes, I believe Capers would have to divest of that company.
Right. So, yeah. So again, many American companies, I just want to make the point that also many American companies who happen to be founded by or headed by, I believe would have to be divested from as well. But that's all I got for now.
Mr. Chairman, did any of you guys have any questions for the reviser?
I do. With regard to the list of foreign adversaries, I believe we're talking about the U.S. Attorney General. Does this have any, does this allow for our state Attorney General to change that list? Because from what I understand, the foreign adversaries list changes extremely infrequently. And given the landscape these days, there are, with the Russia-China pact, there are other countries like Honduras who have recently signed on. And the U.S. foreign adversary list is not very nimble. In other words, there may be some new developing foreign adversaries that we're not aware of that could be developing a shell company in the United States controlled by somebody on that foreign adversary list, but at the state level, we wouldn't be able to react to that change, particularly given the political landscape globally right now. So do you read that as just the U.S. Attorney General? And if we made a change to allow our state Attorney General to be a little bit more nimble with that list, is that possible?
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just for clarification, we're talking about page 3, line 30 through 30, or 34 through 39, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, so the list of foreign adversaries is based on the list of those nations provided in 15 CFR section 7.4, which is a federal regulation. And it's that regulation as in effect on July 1st of 2023. The second paragraph, paragraph B starting in line 34, states that if that regulation is amended, then the state of Kansas Attorney General may, in the Attorney General's sole discretion, adopt rules and regulations to add or remove a entity from the definition of foreign adversary after giving due consideration to the risks of state national security and the economic costs and benefits of such action. So it is the state attorney general's discretion to amend that list based on if that list has been amended under the federal regulation.
So is he solely restricted to that list based on the federal list, or can he add another foreign adversary country if he becomes aware that there is a change in status of some of these countries that is not amended by that list?
The precise language, as the bill reads, is that on the occasion that the federal regulation is amended after July 1st of 2023, then the Attorney General may amend the list for state purposes by adopting rules and regulations.
Okay.
So, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, follow up with that question, this doesn't restrict the Attorney General to only mirroring the changes in the federal law. It's just that if the federal law changes, the Attorney General then can adopt rules and regs to add, as I read it, it's kind of broad, he could add anybody he would want to that, just as long as there was a change made on the federal level. Is that how I'm reading it?
That's correct. The Attorney General would not be restricted to mirror the federal regulation.
Okay.
And that, I think I'm good with that. I think, because it has to be nimble these days, given the situation, and at least in my opinion. So, and I would ask too about on the House Bill 2436 with regard to the term solely. That seems very restrictive to me. Again, this is, it could be construed in different ways. And my concern is that that word solely could become a problem in case somebody's trying to circumvent our law by saying, well, this particular investment is not solely on ESG, but it's on something, it's still sort of ESG, but in a subversive or indiscreet
Mr. Chairman, are you directing this to me or the reviser?
Actually, to you would be fine, because I think we do have a problem with that language.
Okay. I do have one final question to the reviser. It was brought up by my ranking member the other day, a case, because we include firearms in the term ESG. And he, I guess somebody came to him and said with Section 2, would they be able to purchase new firearms as a local unit of government, or is that given preferential treatment to a firearms manufacturer on basis of Section 2 there?
Could you restate that again?
So, yeah, I'm going to turn it over to my ranking here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just talking to one of my local mayors about one of this, and he's also an attorney. And so he said, looking at the plain language, he could interpret it, that meaning like if he's the mayor and they want to purchase upgrades to firearms for their police departments, that they might not be able to do that because that is giving preferential to a vendor on the basis of them being a gun manufacturer. There's nothing in the bill that says you can't give preference to one vendor over another. It just says give preference at all. And so he just wanted clarification on that.
Mr. Chairman, I believe if the object of the transaction is to actually acquire firearms or ammunition or accessories by the political subdivision, I don't believe the bill contemplates that transaction would be giving preferential treatment to a company based on them engaging in manufacturing, distribution, and sale of firearms, as there would be there would be no preference to that as opposed to somebody who didn't sell firearms, because you couldn't acquire the product from a company that didn't sell firearms. So I don't believe that would be the case in that situation, but this is new language, so there will be a number of hypotheticals that could be played out.
Representative Shu, is that satisfactory? Okay, yeah, the last thing I know, our intent was not to restrict any localities from, upgrading their firearms for their police departments. And Senator, I believe you would agree with that.
I would
so.
agree. And in fact, if you look, in a lot of these instances, we talked about the criterion that gives preferential treatment to or discriminates on, based on. So we don't want to give preferential treatment to anyone. We don't want to discriminate against someone based on whether that company meets or fails to meet one of the following criteria. And it gives that entire list. So the way because we did vet that language, we had that question, in fact, come up, said how do we word that? And we kind of landed on that was probably the best way to do it, so that it was as clear as possible about that situation.
And that is all the questions I had for the reviser, Mr. Chairman, if that is all you had for the reviser as well.
At this point, yeah, I think so. And I don't know if it's the time to bring it up or not, but I did ask because because this is an amendment that came up on the floor, I did ask Capers to give us some response with regard to the fiscal note on this. And when we did get some language late this afternoon that they provided that would take out the concerns about the private equity fund portion of it, so that they did not have to divest of any of the private equity funds that exist. But then going forward, they would not invest in any of the any private equity funds that do include someone or on that country's list. So we tried to clear up that concern, so that, again, that was the original concern with Capers. We wanted to make sure that we weren't forcing them to divest early on the private equity funds, and it gives them the time to do so.
And I do appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. As the language currently is, though, do you know what the fiscal impact is currently?
As a current language is this, without the Capers, at around $92 million, which would be $89 million for early divestiture of the private equity funds. The additional $3 million or so would be typical fees for divesting the publicly traded funds, but those would be funds that those fees would have to be paid anytime they make that type of transaction. So those are fees that are going to be paid at some point either way. And with this particular amendment, it does give Capers time to wind down those investments. I think it's over an 18-month period. I'd have to look at the language. So, obviously our aim from our side was not to force Capers into a situation where they're impacting our retirees' funds, but also adds this language, which we think is fairly important.
No,
on the foreign adversaries.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that. Do you know of the fiscal note, the bulk of that fiscal note, which country we're having to divest from that? China? Or?
Yeah, in fact, my conversation was virtually all of it.
Okay,
and China.
And just for clarification, mainland China or Hong Kong?
That part I would have to get clarification from, yeah.
Okay, because I know that there's some ambiguity there between China and Hong Kong, so I'm just curious on that. I think this kind of points to, I think the issue the House has with this amendment is we have a lot of questions on this amendment. This did not run through our committee. It didn't run through your guys' committee for proper vetting. I think my ranking member brings up some excellent points as well. So our position currently is we would like to take this amendment and hold it off for further vetting. We have several different avenues that we can do that. Our Pensions, Investments, and Benefits Committee, interim committee, is able to meet. They can further vet. We can ask questions. We can have Alan come before committee to ask or answer some questions as well. And then they also have the power to recommend, sponsor, or introduce legislation. I understand this is important, and honestly, I don't object to the whole concept of it. It's just I don't feel comfortable when adding this as an amendment on the Senate floor after this made it through House committee, House floor, Senate committee, and then just at the last minute get attached on the Senate floor without proper vetting, at least in either committee. So that is currently our position on this amendment.
Okay. I would say from the Senate side, this is important enough that we need to, I think this is a point where we're going to have to say, we need to talk about this a little bit farther. I think with regard to the rest of the bill, we're fine. I think removing the solely language would be important to us, but the this foreign adversaries piece is something that we, the Senate position, we're pretty strong on this. Did you have something you would like to say?
In regard to that 92 million on the fiscal note, I just wanted some clarification. That is in regard to the amendment itself?
Yes. Yeah, if this amendment stays, then without the new Capers language that we haven't had time to draft up, we got some language from them, then the fiscal note would be 92 million. However, with the new Capers language, which allows them the time still to divest from those private equity funds, then it would go down to something in the vicinity of 89 million. Let me look at it here. I've got it on my screen. It would be, with the suggested language, which we haven't worked up yet, the estimated cost of the China amendment goes from 92 million to 3.8 million. And the 3.8 million is the normal trading costs for selling 528 million in public international equities that have some type of China exposure. So again, that 3.8 million would be typical fees for whenever they change investments within that fund, within a publicly traded fund, not private equity fund. So the private equity part, the 92 million would be the unwinding of those private equity. There's some penalties for doing so early, in addition to the fees, from what my understanding is. So, yeah, did you have more?
Okay, so my concern is, and my point being, that when this amendment was brought up on the Senate floor, I mean, I don't believe any of that information was necessarily available, which could have impacted certain votes taken on the floor. Because obviously this is a pretty healthy amendment that was added on, and, you know, to the point of the representative, the chair, in the House, you know, when you talk about thorough vetting, obviously having pertinent fiscal information would be part of that process, and that is a concern.
Okay.
My ranking does have something to say. Representative Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to go back to the foreign adversary language. This is now the third time this session that this language has come up, and each time I've pointed out the very same fundamental flaw, and that's the definition on page 4, subsection B, line 11. This definition includes legal residents, green card holders, and refugees of these countries. Just as a personal story, I moved to the United States in 1991, and I naturalized in 2001, which means that for 10 years of my life, I would have been considered under this definition of foreign adversary. In my opinion, there's nothing more fundamentally American than immigrants coming to this country and trying to make a better life. And this language, quite frankly, is unworkable for me. Let alone what possible impacts this could have for the Capers piece, and then what they might have to divest from, or whatever. It's just, this language is fundamentally flawed and fundamentally xenophobic, and in my opinion, fundamentally American. So I would strongly recommend that we look at removing that part.
Thank you for that, Representative Shu. I will say we can kind of move off the amendment piece. It seems to be like a sticking point right now, and move on to some other areas where we can find agreement at the moment. Solely, we will take your position on the word solely, removing that from section 2. We are amendable to that. We do understand the Senate's position on how that can cause some problems, so we are okay with removing that. I guess our position currently, to be honest with you, is taking all the language from 291, except for the Senate amendment on the floor, and accepting the rest of the language other than that amendment. That would be our position at the moment.
Okay. And we vetted that pretty well, and I appreciate that. And I think what we need to do is probably have time, because from the Senate position, we're still invested in this foreign adversary portion. If we could have the time to work up the Capers amendment, so that we could make sure we're on the same page about what we're talking, because it looks to me like we're down to negotiating over whether or not this stays in or in what form it stays in. If we could have time for our revisers to work up that amendment, maybe even refine it a little bit. I think that would be helpful going forward, because I think everything else we're on board with.
I think we're 95% of the way there.
Yeah.
We're completely on board with that. We will absolutely take a look at the amendment and have a discussion on it. But as of right now, our position is 291 without the amendment. So,
I might say, with regard to your situation, I think we're not trying to discriminate against individuals who want to come here to this country for a better life. That's what America is about. But we also have to recognize that there are bad actors. There are cartels in Oklahoma growing large grows of black market marijuana. There are shell companies that are buying up land. They're monitoring MBAF, monitoring some of our military installations. And so how do we address that? And that's the Senate position. How do we deal with that? And we haven't had another vehicle to be able to handle that so far. And that's our big concern. So,
and that concern is completely understandable. I will just counter with, there are unintended consequences. And while I think we all have the same goal as to crack down on the bad actors, running it through a committee process where it's fully vetted and we can take away any unintended consequences is kind of the position we would be at on that. And I think that's pretty strongly how the House feels. So I think we have the same goal in mind. It's just how do we accomplish that without unintended consequences? And the House position is, hey, let's run it through a committee. Let's ask the questions. Let's get folks in front of us to testify, the Attorney General, Alan Conroy, and make sure that we fully vet this and have a good plan. So.
sounds like a good plan.
Mr. Chairman, I think tomorrow we are conferencing with the Senate Financial Institutions Committee at 9:30 in the morning, but we should be wrapped up then on that. So we're pretty flexible the rest of the day. And I know you're pretty busy, so.
Actually, I think we're going to try to get a lot of work done this afternoon in ours, and we should be fairly flexible. It depends on the availability of some of the revisers in our, and Senator Faust-Godot. So we have a 10 o'clock floor. So it might be closer to noon or early afternoon, something like that, if that works for you guys.
And for the reviser, will that give you guys enough time to draw up the amendment and have it ready tomorrow and we can discuss it?
And then we can discuss some of the, because I do want to get into the weeds with this to make sure we're not doing anything
And, we
problematic,
appreciate that.
and we can talk about it.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman. Did we agree on the time? Are you going to shoot me a time?
Let me shoot you a
You a time
time.
and-
Yeah, I would guess probably the best would be somewhere around 1.
I think we're good with that.
Tentatively, let's shoot for 1. Yeah, I think that.
All right, we'll have
And I'll
our,
double check. I'll have my.
we'll have our spicy chicken sandwiches again and
Those are pretty good.
They were.
Thank
They
you.
were. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All righty.